I've been discriminated against my whole life because of my sister Emily, the golden child. She even tried to walk down the aisle at my wedding, and I finally got my revenge. From as far back as I can remember, my parents always loved Emily more. It wasn't subtle either. If Emily accused me of something, they'd believe her and punish me. But if I accused her, they wouldn't believe it, even with undeniable proof. They'd still give her a lighter punishment and find a way to scold me too. My birthday cake always had to be a flavor she wanted, never what I liked. My parents always denied knowing I didn't like that type of cake. They always bought her more gifts than me. We went where she wanted, even if it was supposed to be my event. Emily grew up spoiled and used me as her punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but things got worse when we were teens. I'm not sure what caused it, but she ended up with no friends, and her behavior worsened. Did her friends move away or ditch her because she was mean? I don't know. We were never close. My parents loved to brag about her achievements, but never mentioned her problems. They'd bring up any flaw of mine as teasing material. I only knew she had no friends because we went to the same school, and I noticed her alone. Emily had no friends, but I did. I used to be decently popular. Once she realized this, she stopped treating me as an occasional punching bag and started seeing me as a hated person to bring down at all times. She accused me of more things, and she even accused my friends of things. My parents stopped letting me hang out with anyone, saying things like, "They're not good people according to your sister," or "Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from complete isolation was extended family. Most of them lived in the same hometown, and I got along with my cousins despite some age difference. At one gathering, they invited me over to something I don't remember, and I sadly replied, "I'm not allowed to go anywhere." When asked why, my kid self, with no filter, replied, "Because I'm not allowed to have friends since Emily doesn't have any." That reached the adults, who tore my parents apart later. I was scolded for lying and grounded for a month, but after that, they allowed me some leeway, so it was worth it. Emily changed schools after that, as she couldn't handle the humiliation of our extended family knowing her social status was bad. My parents obliged her demands, even though it cost them more because the new school was further away. But she made friends at the new school. However, she never went back to mostly ignoring me. Having felt the power of how badly she could mess with me, and being angry that I told the family she had no friends, she never let it go. My life remained tough. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents called it light teasing. I never invited friends over because my parents were awful hosts to them. Or Emily would accuse them of taking things, and they'd believe her. I became close to my cousins, as my parents never dared to treat them badly. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. At one point we got separated, and he came to find me to tell me that Emily had been flirting with him. She came over in skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, Emily told my parents a different tale, that my boyfriend tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused because she couldn't do that to me. Guess who my parents believed? Now, my boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him for a mean reason. Back then, I was a teen, resentful and moody from the unfair treatment. I now hated Emily as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were overweight, and they liked showing love via food, giving more food and buying treats. Emily was also overweight, while I was always kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is, but Emily was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything. She could demand, and my parents would deliver. My parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I tried to keep the relationship going in secret, but it was hard, and it ended. I did get another boyfriend, but again, Emily accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again, my parents believed her. I pointed out how this happened again, but they decided I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo-Juliet situation and fizzled out. I was eventually called names in high school because I was fine with making out with boys, but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, It never got back to Emily or my parents. Emily brought one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was and why I couldn't be like her and find someone like that. Until he stopped showing up, and suddenly, he was a conniving bastard who tricked her. Oh well. The unequal treatment continued. She had more spending money, her curfews were better, she was free to go anywhere, while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older. But when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment. They deny they ever said that, and claim it was because I couldn't be trusted like her, using her accusations against my boyfriends and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time went by, and it was time for Emily to graduate. She got into a college, not a well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship. My parents made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away, but she'd come home every other weekend and find ways to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict. Eventually, my mom talked to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than Emily. She told me they had no money to pay for my college because they were paying for Emily's. She suggested I start working immediately after graduation and wait until Emily finished college to see if they could afford something for me. If I stayed home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills and rent. I pointed out I could get student loans. Mom said yes, but no because they were so caring towards me, and I had bad judgment. They'd decide if a college was worth getting in debt for. I didn't know how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore, and never believed in my capabilities. I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said, okay. My mom didn't expect that and kept pushing. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to not ever pay for my college. But I said nothing except I understood their position and thanked them for caring. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. After a lifetime of their terrible parenting, I had no expectations for my education. I knew they'd find an excuse not to pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they'd eventually pay if I worked and waited for Emily to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out and my friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did because I saw college as my only chance to be free. When the time came, I worked my ass off and got a scholarship. It wasn't to an Ivy League school or anything like law or medical school, but it was a good course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing Emily would hate it and try to stop me via our parents, I put my achievement on social media at the same time I told them. I even thanked them in the post. They couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to the family why not. Initially, they were a little proud and boasted about it. Then Emily got to them, and they changed gears, asking if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip that Emily wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment, I'd suffer worse. I stuck to my guns. They weren't happy but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such. But since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them. Emily stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because they'd have made a big deal about it. She moved back home, paying no bills or rent. But it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, thanks to my mom pulling strings. This was all sold to me as a source of pride. Oh well, I met my husband around this time. You know those people who say, if I were in that situation, I'd do something? My husband is the type who really does. I am the meek and doormat type in any situation, and then can't sleep at night wishing I'd done something. Thought of something witty to say. I'm the type who can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy who claps back immediately. He loves drama and resolving it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget. He's just planning something worse for revenge. He's the one who wanted me to post here, and even wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled I got together with him. But just because I was incapable, thanks to my upbringing, of acting like him, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't, and treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget, as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out, and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus, there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. Well, at this point, my parents naturally demanded to meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse, but was having a hard time. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. My husband looked like I canceled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he'd been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder to hide in his pocket to record it all. He was stoked, thinking of all the ways he could refuse Emily's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So off he went, alone and excited to meet them, and came back later euphoric. "Babe, you won't believe the awful thing they wanted. Babe, we can mess them over so bad. There are so many possibilities." I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he smartly told me it was better to listen to him first or else I'd misunderstand. Well, he went there, and instead of the flirting, my parents and Emily sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him and my judgment, they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding on one condition. Emily would walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuse was that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if Emily had at least the experience of it at my venue, with pictures being taken and a dress, and she'd have a cake later too. My husband will now type his part. "Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge, instant karma, nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that, like some sort of great gift, even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, methinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole less catalog of insults about to spew out, but something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, "String these folks along." So I said I needed to think, see how my wife back then, fiancée Shaki, would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. My husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about Emily, with a grin on his face, and had the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how bad they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband's insistence on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over, from ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us from retaliation, he at least showed us something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also at risk of getting us sued, so we eventually settled for the most benign plan. Act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. The rest is mostly my husband, but he wants me to do the honors, so here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents, said he probed, and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue and not wanting the family to fall apart would be down to helping them do it. He pointed out I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus, he suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for stuff. This way I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public with our families there, but I'd be grateful for the help they gave. That did pacify them. He said my parents looked surprised, and my grown sister started skipping with joy, literally like a kid, so it was accepted. Important. My husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment and boyfriends in the past, these words were all my idea, and I'm so proud of using their words against them, ALOL. I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in any writing. For any discussion pertaining to Emily walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception, where my parents and Emily thought they were tricking me, and my husband and I were milking them. How? Well, rather than pay for the wedding, they lay low. Of course, my parents wanted input in everything. Some stuff that meant a lot to me, like the songs and color palette, my husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line. But since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was game, or so they thought. What we did was thus. We'd go, say, to check the drink and menu options. We'd then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to also try it out, then sigh and say, "It's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we wouldn't get the best options." Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry, and they'd pay for the most expensive. Same was done with the photographer, flowers. My husband handed Emily a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, then sadly expressed how I wanted some other tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers, and they'd pay for it. Wedding dress. We hit a minor snag here. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, not outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look that good on me. We had planned on saying yes, then simply not using it. But my mom sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof I said okay. We had to go with me refusing in text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. Emily suggested ruining my desired dress, so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they kept communications outside of any text. We made sure that happened by having me reply to my sister's messages to my husband. This solidified the uncontrolling and neurotic claims my husband was making, so they believed it and never risked anything in writing. Maybe some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family, but I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person is extremely funny to me, and I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor, lol. Oh, and Emily did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted. Also, to really sell that he was with them, my husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge, but he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus costs on our honeymoon, had this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spent a dime. We called it back pay for emotional damages from my parents, lol. I think my husband, okay, he just confirmed I'm right, lol, was enjoying tricking them more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday on a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws. But here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents, Emily, and my husband had come up with was to wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride always comes out late, they'd have Emily arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it, and she'd walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it'd be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric for my dress alterations, and my husband took that to my parents' place. Emily still lives with them even now. He showed them as proof he'd ruined the dress, then said he had to go back to me as I was raging, and he needed to calm me down. He'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our actual security hidden at first. As the guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents arrived and sat down did we bring out security, a guy who looked like a bodyguard. We told him not to allow Emily in, and even agreed on paying a handsome tip if he didn't reveal we told him that. Soon the time arrived. My parents got a text that Emily was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad went and told people to start. My bridesmaids had been told to follow his lead beforehand, so they obeyed without checking with me. After they all went down and took their places, my dad stood up at the entrance as if waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready because if my husband, bridesmaids, etc., took out a phone and started texting, people might notice. This friend was in on the plan. She's my husband's friend, willing to help stir drama as he is, and didn't care about being a bridesmaid or anything. Well, as soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song started playing. The doors opened and I came in. My dad looked aghast at me being there. He tried glancing behind me, but you can't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he couldn't see what happened to Emily. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He just left me there with a mumbled, "Something came up." There were gasps and confusion all around. The friend in on it loudly asked what happened. I lied and in a teary voice said, "He told me it wasn't supposed to be me there." It's not what he said, but my husband and I agreed that if he dared leave me, I should say that to make him look the worst possible. As for the tears, I wish I could say it was just my stellar acting, but no. Despite everything, a part of me didn't think he'd go as far as abandoning me there. That the Emily thing wasn't true, but an elaborate joke. I don't know. I was hurt, still am. So I was sincerely trying not to cry. The friend then loudly went, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" So that as many people as possible could hear and spread it. Then one of them said, "I will go and check," and ran off. We decided to do this to make her create hell with the security and stop my dad from coming back and stopping the ceremony or something. At some point, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. Watching him run desperately to me helped me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what happened. Some apparently left to check too. When I reached my husband, though, all was well. He made me feel better, joking. My sad face was so real I deserved an Oscar. And don't worry, he'd rake them over the coals for what they did. LOL. We got married without a hitch. My parents didn't come back. I did notice a lot of people leaving, then coming back during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone did come and whisper in my husband's ear, and he went out. He came back after a while with a thunderous expression, but whispered in my ear he needed to go hide somewhere before he broke character and started smiling, lol. What happened is it worked. The following is the summed account from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband that I received afterward. Emily did arrive in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in per our agreement. He claimed she must be in the wrong venue because there was already a bride. And yes, we tipped him really well as promised. My dad went there and tried threatening him with the police, claiming he never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to the police since he was hired by us and doing his job. My dad realized by then it would be too late and tried to demand he let Emily in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting Emily and asking what was going on, basically stalling. My mom soon came, and eventually other people. At this point, the wedding plan was bust. All my parents could do now was damage control. Everyone who learned about it was aghast they'd try and pull it and started screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret and threw my husband under the bus. My husband was summoned. When he came over, he put on his best look of confusion and denied. To quote him, "Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, LOL." He denied ever agreeing to something so ridiculous. When they insisted he did, he demanded proof, and of course they couldn't produce any. All text exchanges they could produce were about normal wedding decisions. Emily was scream-crying and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a kid. My dad looked like he'd beat my husband, but security and other people held him back. Of course, they said they had no proof because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then again repeated, "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" Tore them a new one about being awful parents, then said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lying get in the way of his wedding and went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they refused to show me the recording, as that was only for security purposes. But some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and Emily get ripped apart by anyone and everyone who came out to check the drama was delicious. After years of being accused of stuff and not believed, watching them have a taste was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying. My dad kept changing from purple to white, and Emily was still on the floor crying and screaming. They kept insisting that my husband was in on it, but people kept asking why he would ever agree to something so messed up, why there was no proof, and why they wanted Emily to do this at my wedding. They had no good answer to any of it. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag Emily up as she refused to leave the ground. People said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me, and maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once. But it did feel like everyone was making an extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says all the expensive stuff they were eating and drinking certainly helped. LOL. We had a blast. My husband maintained the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before going to our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky, as they could try and cancel them or something, so we refused. Of course, since that whole thing, the three have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. A smart thing, because Emily did eventually message me. I won't repeat it as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense. But the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake who fooled them for months and hoped but was also certain it would happen, that I'd get cheated on by him. She also suggested he was cheating on me with her. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, screenshot my sister's message, screenshot some messages from my parents demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to our family group chat. He sent screenshots of messages to him where they called him names and threatened him, but he kept up the "you're delusional, I never agreed to anything" shtick, and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in the group chat begging my family for help, as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He begged the family to help stop them from trying to ruin our honeymoon now that they failed to ruin our wedding, then finished neatly with a request that they don't share our locations to avoid my parents sending Emily over, and then claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to be with her in our honeymoon suite, LOL. My family assured him they'd take care of it, and indeed, since then, we've had silence. My husband is a little disappointed Emily didn't disobey, so he could tattle again while tearing her a new one. We'll see if it'll last. All in all, while I obviously would prefer to have a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got them back. Extra info. Do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will think the same. I've wondered this all my life, and still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for acting spoiled. So I quit trying. I've thought of so many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have Emily, so she was not only wanted, but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our age difference is quite small, I think they didn't expect to have a kid so soon or easily, and didn't use adequate protection way too soon after Emily's birth, and maybe didn't notice my mom was pregnant until too late. So they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn, and they're not that well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help. So they resented me. But that's my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted the answer won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted, no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I talked, and we have the theory that they never wanted to do this at all. We think Emily threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates, and they gave my husband that outlandish proposition. They didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept or that it would even look good for them to do it. But by suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to Emily while having an excuse to not give me a dime. But then, my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack or else risk Emily turning on them.